Yeah, sorry, we're jumping in hot here because we've had an interesting development, and thank you so much for having us on, man. I really appreciate this, and I don't want to hijack this, but we've had a major development just happen. So, as we're recording this, we are 64 hours away from the end of Butts and Seats Kickstarter campaign, which people can see at buttsandseatscomic.com, and we are less than $1,000 away from unlocking the championship edition of the book, which means along with the other 16 stretch goals, everyone will get their own, like a gold belt on the cover, 3 wrestling trading cards, along with the bonus comic, along with the pin, along with the triple sign book plate, along with the bonus stories, along with the bonus pinups and everything else. But here's what's very interesting. Tony, I just got a private message on the interwebs. And we have had an offer. Now, this may be a mildly indecent proposal. Lauren said that if we replace Lois with the love interest with Lauren Yaffe, that she will push us over to the championship edition right now.
Oh my God. I am sorry to start out this Comics Cube with that.
I mean, this is, see what it is. This is the inside baseball of comic books is you get these random messages from people like Lauren, who I've never met, who said, hey, if I can be Tony's love interest in the book, she will put us over. And Tony, that's nothing to sneeze at. I'm just
yeah, I can sneeze at that. I don't think the blowback would be worth the money.
Okay, so Lauren, if you're out there watching, we did ask. And as you can see, Tony is a man of upstanding principle, high moral caliber.
Wouldn't go that far, buddy.
Terrified of his wife.
I would go that far.
And we did our best. So
there you go. So it's great being with you guys today.
This is what a start.
This is I think this is about our 12th interview we've done roughly over the course of all this. So I had to get a little ribbing in there right off the bat. So thank you for humoring me on that. So
before we continue, can I just say that Mr. Tony Schiavone, like I mentioned off the air earlier, you called the first ever wrestling pay-per-view I ever watched, SummerSlam 1989.
Very cool.
Well, and much like the narrative of the book, now here we are full circle. From you being introduced to your first wrestling pay-per-view to being an advocate of comics everywhere and now interviewing Tony. Tony started his life as a fan of professional wrestling and comics, and now he is in professional wrestling and comics. So I guess that makes me the thorn between two roses here, but that aside.
Isn't that crazy? How did the project end up coming together? But I know, Tony, you're mentioned as you're a big comic book fan. Travis McIntyre told me. So how does this end up coming together for you guys?
I think more than a comic book fan, I'm a big superhero fan. I love superhero movies, television shows, and superhero action figures, superhero statues, superhero posters, collectibles. I guess I can all put it into one. When we had the first Starcast I'm sorry, let me back up. When we made an appearance at C2E2 in 2018, Conrad Thompson, who I do a podcast with, introduced me to Mike Dawkins. And Mike and I got to know each other. He became my lawyer. Good guy, smart guy. And so he approached me and he said, would you be willing to put your story out in comic book form? And I immediately went, yeah, hell yeah, I would. I had I had talked about, kicked around with a couple of different people doing a book about my career like others have in wrestling. But when the comic book was mentioned to me, I said, yeah, absolutely. Because somebody that bought comic books when he was young, didn't collect them. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, a lot of those were thrown away. And we're talking about the 60s and 70s. But bought a lot of comic books. Had a lot of comic books bought for me as well by my parents. and my sister. And so I thought, yeah, absolutely, I want to do that because this would be great to be in a comic book, you know. So he said, "Well, I've got somebody in mind, Dirk Manning, and and Dirk and Mike are from the same town, and so he got us together on a Zoom call, and basically we've been zooming ever since then. I mean, everything we've done's been on the Zoom call, talking about this project of ours. So you got to credit Mike Dawkins with this because he's the one that put us together. He knows Dirk, and if he trusts Dirk, then that's good enough for me because I trust Mike. And now that I've gotten to know Dirk and Drina Joe, I think Mike has put me in touch with some real good people, and I'm very happy with it.
Dirk, how'd you get into this from your point of view, from your stance and perspective?
Yeah, well, and like Tony said, Mike first kind of started buttering me up on this idea. Mike is friends with Scoot McMahon, who is the artist and co-creator of, I know you're a big Source Point advocate, but The Adventures of Cthulhu Jr. and Dastardly Dirk from Source Point. So I got to know Mike Dawkins through then, although some interesting secret history. Very, very, and I think I even told you this, Tony. Came to find out that about 10 years prior to Mike and I meeting through Scoot, I hired Mike when I had an online comic that was published briefly by MTV on the MTV Geek website. And I kept thinking, I'm like, this guy's so familiar. And I went to my emails and found out that through a different law firm, I hired Mike to review the contract I had with MTV. Okay. So small world, but point being, I got to know Mike again through Scoot McMahon, and we were talking things like that. We're both big wrestling fans. We both know Scoot. And as Mike got to be familiar with my work with Source Point Press, he said, hey, would you be interested in doing a comic book with Tony Schiavone? And my exact words to him were, I'd be willing to have that discussion. And I say that, obviously we got to, mess with each other a little bit and stuff like that. But I'm primarily a creator-owned guy, and I'm primarily a horror guy. And I knew that telling a life story, potentially what could have been a life story, and we talk about Tony's life story in wrestling, that could be a very involved process and things like that. And I stay pretty active doing my own creator-owned work primarily. But I knew it'd be a cool opportunity, and knowing Tony and stuff like that. But I also, it's like doing a book of this magnitude, Butts and Seats, again, which you can get at buttsandseatscomic.com. I knew this would be a very large undertaking, and to treat a legacy like Tony has had, working with almost every major wrestling promotion in the United States in history, I knew this would be a long process. And truth be told, from that first Zoom call when Tony and I got together with Mike and Drina Joe and Dave Silva, it's been a year from that point, over a year from that point to here. So I had a little trepidation. I'm like, do I want to get wrapped up in this? And, and I'm glad I did. It's been one of the best experiences I've had in my life in comics to date. I've got to become friends with Tony and just all of us. It's been a long process. We've had a lot of fun. I'm exceptionally proud of this book. I'm exceptionally proud of, I think, what we're going to be able to do with this book. And I'm exceptionally proud of, I think, what this book's going to do moving forward. So it was cool. And again, a lot of credit goes to Mike Dawkins, gimmick attorney. He goes online. But also, I want to give a quick shout out too, to even through the length of this Kickstarter, the people like Lori and Dave Silva, who've been doing, and Travis McIntyre and the whole team at Source Point Press, how much they've been doing to help push awareness on this campaign, doing the videos. Tony, big props to you for getting so many of those amazing wrestling promos that we've been getting. It's really been a team effort. And one of the things I personally love most about working with comics, because people sometimes will say, why don't you just write books? And I could, but I love comics because I love the teamwork of it. I love working together and getting a team of divergent personalities and different talents. And this project has just really helped reinforce my love of how this can go well when you're working with the right people. And it's just been such an amazing process. So thank you, Tony, for this opportunity.
It's been fun. And I want to thank very briefly before we move on, I want to thank every wrestler who agreed to do it with me. I could have asked many more, But as we do backstage in AEW a lot, things are like hectic, and you get them when you can. But no one turned me down. Everybody was glad to do it with me. I mean, I had Jericho and Sting and Orange Cassidy and Eddie Kingston and just some great guys who helped me out. So I appreciate them helping promote this and promote this Kickstarter. So it's been a lot of fun, this effort. So, and can't wait to everybody get together and look at it. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, that one comp copy that you'll be getting from Mike Dawkins as part of his contract that you'll get. You can all gather under the circle and share it.
Okay.
I saw a little less than 48 hours ago was Sting.
Yeah, Sting.
Yeah.
And I told Sting and I have been friends for a long time, and have known each. As a matter of fact, Sting is in butts and seats, and as you might imagine. And I told him, I said, you know what? I said, I mean, it means a lot for you to do this for me. He said, man, anything. He said, we've been together for a long time. Anything you need. So, yeah, the Sting thing was big, and the Jericho thing was big. I mean, we're talking about two mega stars.
Yeah.
Being able to do that.
Truly iconic characters.
Right.
And again, it's one thing to be working on this book and you look at it like pragmatically, like, we talked about it a little bit like, oh my gosh, okay, Tony, if you could get a couple wrestlers to cut promos on this book and him coming through and to the degree he did, there's the business aspect of that. But let's also not remove, at least for someone in my position, the fandom aspect of that. And when Tony's like, got 5 more videos, and then you open it up and it's like, you got Chris Jericho cutting a promo on this book, or MJF in character, of course he's always a character, cutting a promo on this book. And then when Sting came through, it's just like, it's been so invigorating and so much fun. And it's fun to enjoy the process professionally and be proud of what we're doing. But to also have those fandom moments has just been a real gift,
My favorite bit in the Sting promo is that Tony introduces him with a classic call. It's Sting. Would you say it's your most iconic call, Tony?
Well, you know what? It's become that. I kind of I thought the calls I were most remembered by was "That'll put butts in seats," ding, and Hulk Hogan, "You can go straight to hell."
Yeah.
I thought those were the one but apparently, it's. And let me tell you about It's Sting. Tony Khan, who is such a big wrestling fan from the old school stuff, and we're talking about Sting and even before that, he says, every time he comes out, I want you to say it. I want you to hit it. I said, okay, boss, you got it. Whatever you want to do. And just recently, and I think it may be going to air on the tape show we got coming up tomorrow night. I think it is. Sting came out, and I didn't know he was coming out. And so I kind of hit it real quick. It's Sting. And so after the taping, he said, I need you to do it again. I said, okay. So I sit there on headset with the wrestlers watching me, looking at me and laughing, going, it's Sting. And I had to do it like 5 times. And I said, okay, talking parrot's done. Please use one of those. So they'll put that in tonight when you see Sting. Or tomorrow night when you see Sting run in, it wasn't edited, it's Sting, because that's what he wants me to do. And I kind of feel now tied to him. I do. I feel, and I feel proud of that moment that in many ways I'm tied to Sting. And it means a hell of a lot to me because what he's been to this sport.
That's a great story. It's like, it's different when it's live, right? Versus when you have to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I know he's coming out, and I knew he was going to come out, but I didn't know when. And all of a sudden I look up and he was there, so I really didn't hit it like I should have. And Tony's going to get it right. Tony Khan is, I can tell you that. So I was glad to get it right for him.
I'll tell you what, though, with all of the calls that you made, I mentioned earlier that the first pay-per-view I ever watched was SummerSlam 1989. And the call that has always stuck in my head that you've made has been when Warrior hits Rick Rude with a big splash and you just yell out, "The Warrior!"
Really?
And it really sold the Ultimate Warrior to me, which now as an adult I realized was a really tall order because he was ridiculous.
Yes, right.
So, and you sold that to me. You sold Sting to me every time he came out, the NWO, how bad Hulk Hogan was.
Yeah.
what would you say is the running theme of the book? Because I asked Travis McIntyre, and it was basically a storyteller, Dirk, telling a story about another storyteller, Tony, who tells
Yeah.
stories about other storytellers.
Well, that I guess that's a good way to put it. I think the running thing of the book is a guy who came from a very small town, very small town, in the mountains of Virginia, who was a gigantic wrestling fan and found his way into the business, which is, if you think about it, it's kind of odd. My oldest son Matt, I took my oldest son Matt to my hometown years ago when he was in college, and we drove through it, and he says, "You came from this?" I went, "Yeah." He said, I can't believe this. So I came from very small surroundings. I'm not going to say we grew up poor, but we grew up very lower middle class. And I loved baseball. That was my first love. And then when I was in high school, after my father died, by the way, father died in 74. After my father died in 74, I found wrestling, and I was passionate about wrestling. And I just happened to start doing baseball, and baseball led to wrestling, and that led to my entire life. So it's the story of my life in wrestling, my feelings about leaving wrestling, my feelings about leaving the WWF or WWE now in 1990, my feelings about that, and coming back to WCW, my feelings about leaving there, and what I had to do to make ends meet here. And it was it's just that story is what it's about. And of course, I tell the story of me and through Dirk, and tell the story of other guys too. Some of the guys that I met and some of their stories as well.
Dirk, have you always been a wrestling fan?
Yeah, I pretty much came out of the egg a wrestling fan. I was saying before that someone else, we were talking about how I was very fortunate that I actually knew my great grandmother growing up.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, right. And I used to watch wrestling with my great grandma, and she would, just spit every time he said his name, about like, oh, Gorgeous George and blah blah blah, she classic, and Bruno Sammartino is the man, and Gorgeous George is terrible, and all that. So since I was very young, I've always been an unabashed wrestling fan. So to now, again, to be able to take that level, and even some of the, like, I did a story in my horror anthology, Love Stories About Death. One of them was a professional wrestling story, so to now be to the point where to get to tell a story about professional wrestling, and to piggyback on what Tony said, this truly the heroic journey of kid from small town, loves wrestling, gets to go into the business, becomes disenfranchised with the business, falls out of the business, gets pulled back into the business, and rediscovers his passion and legacy in the business. That is in some ways a tale as old as time. When you look at really when you look at that journey, and it's a story that, I mean, if it wasn't true, I think people would accuse me of making it too good. I mean, it's just this Tony's life story in wrestling is an amazing story. So to now get to tell that type of story, which is a feel-good story at times. I mean, there's times that it's, there's some despair, there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of humor.
Mm-hmm.
And then pair that with the backdrop of professional wrestling, which everyone is familiar with professional wrestling on some level, whether you have a morbid curiosity or whether you're a super fan. Everyone's aware of it. And to see the journey of the Tony character, who is Tony, but then go through this journey with the backdrop of professional wrestling, it's been a treat. Again, it's just been such a fun process to do, and we're just exceptionally excited about this book, and I know Tony doesn't like to hear it, but he's just he has a great story. He's a great guy, and he has a great story, and it's just been a real honor to get to tell the story and bring it to people. Even though it's not Tony's whole life story, it's his life in wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to turn a lot of heads, and I dare say it's going to put a lot of butts in seats.
We hope.
I want to talk about that title, Tony, because when you made that call, it was, forgive me for saying it, it was essentially the wrong call.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And how do you feel about the fact that that is now in the lexicon, and that's
Well, at first I'm thinking, is that all fans remember me for? And then I got to thinking that if fans think that is one of the most famous calls in wrestling, maybe I should be glad to be a part of that. I made a lot of wrong calls, man, before that and since that. But that was the one that everybody clings to, everybody points to, that turned things around. The realism, or the realistic thing about all this is that there are a lot of things that led to the demise of WCW that just helped hasten things. Um, but I regretted the call, and I called Mick Foley immediately afterwards, and that's all in the book. Our the exchange that we had, which is pretty interesting in itself. When Dirk and Dawkins and Drina Joe all got with me on one Zoom call, they said, "What about butts and seats?" And I went, "Nah."
For the
I thought,
title, right?
yeah, I thought it had too negative a connotation to my career. And then I also said, what butts as a butts as a, it's just not a good word, butts. And for the name of a book, okay. And what I wanted was jabroni, because I just always, for some reason, I always thought myself as a jabroni. I'm a guy that, puts over other guys and girls. And so, that's a term that's obviously been used a lot by the Iron Sheik, and obviously been used a lot by the Rock. But it's a term that's, again, used as somebody that puts over somebody else. So I thought, I am a jabroni. So jabroni would be, and then they talked me out of that, and I didn't want to argue with them even more than we were arguing that night or discussing that night. So I just relented and said, yeah, go with it. And so here we are, butts and seats, and it works on many levels, I guess, Dirk.
Well, that too. I appreciate the volley. The other thing that was funny was I kind of talked to Travis McIntyre, the editor-in-chief of SourcePoint Press, and I said, we don't have a title yet. And I said, the working title in my mind for this book, which I knew we would never use, but the title and for the theme was A Life Among Giants, because that's really what this book is ultimately about. It's, but it sounded too snobby, too pretentious. And I told him, I said, you know what I keep thinking about? And I said, I know Tony's going to hate it, so I might need some help on this. I said, is butts and seats. And Travis was kind of like, goes, yeah. He goes, that could be a tough sell. But what I told Travis, I said, but here's why. One, I'm kind of a punny writer anyway. Books like Tales of Mystery, Right or Wrong. I was like, I fancy myself funnier than I am in real life.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, exactly. We're on the page. If I was any cornier, I'd be a professional wrestling announcer. So,
wow.
We have 64 hours left in the campaign, Tony, that we never have to
see each other ever again.
Ever again. We're
That's
done. No, but what I told Travis, and I think this is your volley, Tony, was I said, the theme of this whole book is putting butts in seats. The very first chapter of the book, Tony is buying, after just watching wrestling with his Uncle John, buying tickets to a live wrestling event so they can all go watch the wrestling event. And what happens there? And it's a hilarious story. It's illustrated by DJ Kaufman. And then, Tony's job as a sportscaster and a sports announcer, wrestling announcer, was putting butts in seats. Like you said, he sold the Ultimate Warrior. He makes the Ultimate Warrior like the biggest thing imaginable. And I'm not trying to, poke fun at the dead, but Warrior was a very over-the-top character. But like you said, was like, and Warrior, here we go, and I'm not going to profess to be nearly as skilled an auditor as or orator as Tony is on this stuff, but he makes you believe it. He brings you into it. He's putting the butts in the seats. Then there's obviously the Mick Foley line, which a whole chapter of the book is that night and the fallout of that night. What happened? Tony gets out of wrestling. He comes back, he gets drawn back into podcasting with Conrad Thompson. Why? Because he's going to put butts in seats. People want to hear his story. And then again, coming back into AEW, the voice of so many people's childhood. People are coming in, and old school wrestling fans are coming back to AEW and seeing the reinvigorization, I guess. I don't know. It's been a long week, but the reinvigorizing of professional wrestling, because in part, Tony's been putting butts in the seats again. So we had this discussion with Tony about it, and he was kind of like, okay, fine. Tony's very non-confrontational. He's like, okay, I'll just go for it. But what's funny is right around that time, and I think it's when Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, when we first proposed it and then you agreed to do it, was like the 20th, 25th anniversary, whatever it was, of the Butts and Seats night.
Yeah.
And
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I wish we planned it better, but again, there's this cosmic kismet and what have you.
Right.
Mick Foley tweeted about it. And I don't want to steal your thunder, Tony. You can kind of talk about what happened. Mick Foley tweeted about that night. And do you want to talk about your response?
Yeah, he tweeted about it, rightfully so, how big a night it was in his career, and how he remembers and thanks everybody who was a part of it. And I retweeted it with the comment, I was glad to be part of it. And it's that simple. And I was. So you can't pull that whole thing away without putting me in there somewhere. So I get it. So that's the name of the book. And that's why I went with it. I want to add something here before we go to our next question. Dirk, you said it was a long week. It's Tuesday, dude. It's Tuesday. Okay.
What's that tell you?
Thank
you. 30 Rock called. They want their gimmick back.
Okay.
That is an interesting thing about professional wrestling, right? It's all the interplay between between the fans, and you're talking to the fans, and then the fans switch over to watch Mick Foley win.
Sure.
You did put him over that night. You ended up putting somebody over anyway.
Yeah, that was my job, right? Putting me over. So, and it couldn't happen to just a nicer, more genuine guy. And a little story behind the scenes, the WrestleMania, I don't know which one it was. The WrestleMania that was in Orlando, the last one, which probably was like 2018, maybe. I don't know. 2019 was probably New Orleans. Can't remember. I was at the WrestleMania hotel because I was in town because it was spring training with the Braves. And so I was just kind of, wanting to see everybody that I could see. And it was just about the time for baseball to start for the major leagues, and the minors were still down there. And Mick Foley came walking through the lobby of the hotel, the Marriott, and I saw him. And I went, "Hey, Mick, how you doing?" And I swear, he turned to me and he said, I know you from somewhere.
That look, right?
And I went, that line's going to put butts in seats. And he went, Tony. I went, yes, you son of a bitch. So, I got to hit him with it twice. So that's a memorable moment, but it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. And I'm glad. You know what? And if this reading of this graphic novel makes people remember Mick Foley and what he gave to wrestling, then I'm cool with that too.
And it'll help them remember other wrestlers as well, because because as with every story, there is a main character, and there's also a supporting cast. Who would you guys say if you had to pick only one main supporting cast member, who would you say it is?
Well, it would have to be Lois, wouldn't it? Yeah. Dirk, my wife, because coming up in June, Lois and I will have been married 40 years. And so she's been with me through almost the entire thing, with the exception of my years before college. And so it would be her, I guess.
Your whole adult life.
The whole adult life, yeah.
Oh. The second chapter of the book is called An Unexpected Dinner. Yeah. And it's when Tony and Lois met. Right. And from them meeting to them getting married, which I don't want to give away too many of the details, is not a long stretch of time. Right.
Yeah. No, we met and I proposed and we got married in a very quick span, to the point where people didn't think it would last long because we rushed it, and look how it's lasted. So she's been through me between every bit of my ups and downs of my career. Not one time in my career and we've had some downs and we've had some struggles. We really have, that she has never been the wife to put extra added pressure on me about bringing home a paycheck. She's always hung with me, whatever I want to do. So, so she's the main character. My Uncle John's a very much a main character in this. Eric Bischoff, Jim Ross, people who influential in my career, Cody and Tony Khan. You know, when I go through the guys at
Jim Crockett.
Jim Crockett, the guys at WSB Radio, in the Georgia Bulldog Radio Network, in the Atlanta Braves, who I've worked for 11 years. All these are very, very instrumental parts of my growth, not only as an employee and as an announcer, but as a human. And but I think Lois is probably the main character that we see most of all.
And two, Conrad Thompson and Tony Khan as well played
Yeah.
pretty big parts in the second half of the book. But
Right.
yeah, if you take one chip and you got to put it on the table, it's Lois.
Yeah. Conrad was the one that really kind of got me back into all this again. I sent out the meme, or it was a meme. It was Michael Corleone from Godfather 3, when he's sitting there in the kitchen. He says, right when I thought it was out, they pulled me back in. Yeah, so that was kind of Conrad pulling me back in. So he was very instrumental and I wouldn't be here today doing wrestling again if it wasn't really for Conrad Thompson, Cody, and Tony Khan.
I'm interested in the process with which you work together, because obviously, Tony, you tell the stories to Dirk, and then Dirk has to put them in comic book form. But
Right.
Dirk, you also mentioned that you're a longtime wrestling fan, so I assume that you read the dirt sheets.
Well, you know what? No, I really didn't. Let me tell you why. Because when I didn't know about dirt sheets until I started working for Jim Crockett Promotions. So I started working for it. And Jim Crockett told me that I needed to respect the business and kayfabe. And I always saw the dirt sheets as trying to expose the business.
Mm-hmm.
So I really was not interested in those.
Okay.
I always found out, because it was always a talk backstage about, what Meltzer or Wade Keller had said or something like that. But I never really did read them unless somebody would show me a copy of it, say, hey, look at this. Look what they said about you. I said, oh, that's great. But no, I never did follow. I wasn't that type of wrestling fan. I was a fan that was very much into the realism of it. When I was a fan, believed it,
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got into the business, I was very much a guy that believed in keeping it backstage, keeping kayfabe alive. So,
Dirk, did you read the dirt sheets as a fan? The dirt sheets. The dirt
sheets. That's a whole different animal.
wow.
No, yeah, I mean, I was aware of them, and like I would read I was an voracious reader. So when I was younger, I would buy like the wrestling magazines and stuff like that to learn about it, which obviously I think there was a mix of a lot of kayfabe in there with occasionally more realism. But as time goes on, you become aware of that. And what you realize is that, people can get on the internet and say anything about anything. And there's always people that believe it. Those people that believe there's two Ultimate Warriors. There's people that believe, what is the saying? A lie can travel around the world faster than the truth can put its shoes on.
Yeah.
Whatever that thing is. So I was aware of them and stuff like that. But what you start to realize, or at least I started to feel pretty quickly in regards to wrestling dirt sheets, was that oftentimes I got the impression it was people fantasy booking and trying to fantasy book their story ideas into real life. Which I would argue is, quite frankly, a lot of social media. Social media is performance art. So I was aware of them, but okay. I just want to watch the product and enjoy it. And
so I asked that question because I'm curious if there were ever any instances where, Tony, you're telling your side of the story, and then Dirk goes, "Wait, but that's not what I read."
Oh no.
No.
I don't think so. No, that never happened. And maybe I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, please somebody tell me. I'm sure in the grand scheme of wrestling fandom, I'm not so sure how much of a slice of those people, those fans, really read the dirt sheets. Isn't that just for the hardcore type?
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
Yeah, that may be.
Yeah.
I don't think we ever contradicted anything Tony said. I think sometimes we would probe deeper, or sometimes I would pick at things in maybe ways that I would have to explain why I'm digging in on this thing. Because when Tony would tell a story, the way we set this all up was, and again, Mike Dawkins helped do this as well, we really broke Tony's life into 10 segments, and his life in wrestling into 10 segments. First time he discovers professional wrestling to getting back in AEW, everything between. So, and not to get too much in the science of it, but every chapter was 10 pages. So you got 10 chapters, 10 pages. We have 100 pages of core content story. And on the average comic page, you can have on average, usually about 5 panels a page, which means whether I'm talking about the butts and seats night, or whether I'm talking about Tony's 18 years out of professional wrestling, which was a chapter in and of itself as well, either way you're looking at it, you're looking at telling that whole story in 50 pictures, which condense it, and Tony and I obviously like to, rib each other a little bit and stuff like that, and I always say, it takes a master to make it look that easy. But, well, I say that because I see you have a poster behind you of one of the masters of comic book writing. Unless I'm wrong, is that an Alphabets of Desire poster by Alan Moore?
It is an Alphabets of Desire poster.
Yeah.
Todd Klein.
Look at that. Hold on. Mine is right there. I have my wall right over there as well, signed by Todd Klein. So I know that you recognize the masters of both lettering as well as storytelling. Point being, now that I got my cheap pop on myself aside.
Wow.
Is
no one pops Dirk Manning like Dirk Manning.
That's right. I learned that from Mick Foley, right? Hello, Cleveland.
Jeez.
Well, you're a Swamp Thing fan, Tony, so I know you appreciate Alan Moore as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, but I would drill down on certain things because in my mind, as we're sitting on these Zoom calls, and it would be 5 of us on this call, and Tony's talking, and I'd be taking notes, I'd be typing some stuff, I'd be writing some stuff. We'd have Junior Joe there as a backup. Mike Dawkins would help steer the ship a little bit sometimes as well. We're still not sure what Dave Silva did. I think he hit record usually.
Hit record on Zoom, fell asleep.
Yeah, that's about it. But I would be thinking about how am I breaking down the story? It's kind of like, like the Matrix or like Iron Man, in the movies with the screen. Like, how am I going to break this down into, 50 images? And then in each balloon or in each panel, your word balloons, you should have a total of about 30 words per panel. So sometimes I would want to drill down because I knew in the medium of comic books, there's a certain way to do this. And Tony, I would start to drill down on something and he would start to elaborate with a great amount of detail. And I'm sitting here, typing away and okay. And I'm typing and he's going on. And all of a sudden I'm like, I look up and he's just laughing because he's just pulling my leg. He's like, I don't remember what happened in, 1987 and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Here I've got like half a page of notes written down, so that was a very tangible answer. I apologize, but the dirt sheet stuff, no, I never dug into that. The joke we would have was I would tell Tony, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Right.
Yeah, that's what's going to be my next question. How do you take the facts and make them into a story? Like, you ever condense them down or put?
Well, Dirk has to answer this. I guess we go through. We started with. We didn't start at the beginning, did we?
No. We started with. I'd have to look at the notes. I think we started with. I don't think we didn't start with the butts and seats night. But we started later in your career. I think we started when you started in WCW, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it may have been that. And there are certain points in my career that stick out with me. When I went to my first match with my Uncle John, when I first watched TV, saw wrestling on TV, when I graduated from college and met Lois and got a job in baseball and got my first job in wrestling and moved to the WWE for a year, moved back to WCW. And then through WCW, there's a lot of, would you say that WCW is the biggest part of this? Because that's who I was with the longest.
Yeah. In terms of the wrestling stuff. Yeah. I mean, that's where really, that as far as the wrestling stuff goes, that takes up probably the bulk of it.
And there's a lot of WCW high points, like Tony comes back, Tony starts working with JR, and works for Jim Hurd, Kip Fry, Bill Watts, Eric
Mhm.
Bischoff, the
Vince
company
Russo's in there.
ends. Yeah, all the different stories in there about Vince Russo, and about Hulk Hogan, Sting, and that whole NWO thing. I don't know if NWO thing is the right thing to say, but that's in there. And then leaving the business and going to work for other people and meeting Conrad, getting into podcasting, meeting Tony Khan, and here we are today. So you can really draw. I mean, I can easily draw the dots
Mhm.
of some of the high points of my career. They're not necessarily what you saw on TV, but they're the things that happened in my career. Like, for instance, one of the things I remember in my career was how I agonized over the choice of staying with the WWE in 1990 or coming back to WCW. It was a decision I agonized over quite a while, and so that's in there, and I remember that a lot. And then having to go out and find a job after WCW went down. So that's, I mean, that's basically the high points, and we took the high points and made a book out of them.
Yeah, and as much as we would joke about, don't let the facts have a good story. The story is true. We
Mhm.
don't we have not added anything in that's not factual. Um, there are times where, like, one of the things that really blew me away, and it wasn't until after the book was written and being illustrated, like I said earlier, we have a whole chapter on the Butts and Seats night. It's chapter 6, illustrated by Colm Griffin, amazing artist. 10 pages on that night in the lead up and the fallout. Another chapter called Leaving Wrestling, illustrated by Josh Ross, masterfully illustrated by Josh Ross. That chapter covers 18 years of Tony's life in 10 pages.
All right.
So
Is it a
really what it was
standard 10 pages per chapter?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's 4 bonus stories that are 4, 4, 4, and 6. Because with the last story being Ric Flair, he got 2 extra pages.
Okay.
But it was 10 page chapters, but again, like Tony said, you want to kind of hit the highlights. So it was never about, we never had to embellish anything because there was so much there to begin with, but sometimes it was like cutting stuff out. Tony's parents aren't mentioned in the book. Not that there's ill will or anything else, obviously, but they just, although I did look back on this, so we did touch on your parents very briefly in that conversation, but it sounds pretentious to say, but as a writer, they're not important to this story. They're important to Tony's story, they're important to his life, but we had to kind of decide what's the stuff that's going to propel this narrative forward.
Yeah. Well, they weren't, my dad had passed away in 74, in the
Right.
summer of 74, and it wasn't until the fall of 74 that I found professional wrestling. So he never knew about my wrestling fandom. My mother passed away in 1990 when we first came back. So she saw my career through the Jim Crockett era and my 1 year in the WWE. And that was basically it. She died in 1990. So they died very early. And so they were not influenced. They didn't influence my wrestling fandom at all. So, and that's why they weren't. And then again, when you think about it, another thing is, how do you condense all this? I'm not so sure outside of, as a matter of fact, I am sure outside of what is in this graphic novel and these 10 chapters of 10 pages, I'm not so sure anything outside of that is interesting enough to read about.
Really?
In my life. Yeah. I'm not so sure. I just don't think it is. It doesn't interest me. Put it that way.
Well, when this show started, Dirk said you were very humble. So that might just what do you think, Dirk? Is that just him being humble right now?
Tony and I have been talking on Zoom calls every couple of weeks with our team for about a year. And like I said, his story is very fascinating, which is why I think it's going to make it is making an amazing graphic novel. We're over $119,000 in pledges with a little over 2 days left. And that's before people have even read it. That's just from things people hear from very gracious podcasters like you. That being said, after talking to Tony for a year, there's only one thing that he told me that, looking back, I kind of cussed him out. I'm like, God dang it. I go, I wish you would have told me about that thing because I would have I would have wedged it into the book. I would have, it was with you and your childhood friend who was visually impaired in the radio.
Yeah.
But I could just see it, but there's always going to be stuff left on the cutting room floor. I mean, Tony's a natural storyteller. He's a very humble guy, which makes it very easy to be very interested in the story because he's not a guy that's out there to put himself over, as much as we joke about, putting ourselves over, putting myself over, or whatever. That's the show. That's the hype. But then there's like the real person behind that. And the person behind that, Tony's a great guy. He's a very humble guy. And his story is very endearing. And my initial trepidation about doing the book was I didn't want to get wrapped up in a vanity project where I have to spend a year listening to a guy put himself over. But like Tony said, real talk, but that's not what this was about. It was evident from the first meeting, that jabroni mentality about he's just a guy who has put other people over his whole life and lived this life among giants and put butts in seats. And that's what's led us to this book that I'm just so excited for people to read it, and they can go pre-order their copy at buttsandseatscomic.com until Friday at noon Eastern Daylight Time.
I think that's such a refreshing thing to hear because, I was talking to Travis McIntyre as well, and I was telling him that a lot of wrestling books, they end up being about, about grudges or people burying everyone. And then you made a point that, Tony, you bury no one in this book.
Yeah, you don't get it. You don't. I mean, listen, I didn't especially in the years in WCW, didn't always get along with everyone. And Lord knows the people at the Georgia Bulldog Radio Network knows that I don't always get along with everyone there because I don't. But you get nothing out of burying people. Nothing good comes about it. And so I cannot remember in wrestling maybe one person, but he's the only one, and he's no longer with us. And we're talking about a guy that I met back in the 80s. So it's nobody that anybody would know. There's only one person I never did get along with in wrestling. I always got along with everyone. I always made it a point to get along with everyone because I think that's what you got to try to do in life. You try to get along with everyone. And so I'm not going to bury anybody. We get nothing out of it.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things we talked about when we started putting the book together was not knowing Tony as well as I do now is, one of the things you might remember the story I said is we have to remember a book is not a place to bury anybody.
No, it's not.
And again, that's Tony's personality. And I'm not saying we ever talked the guy off of a ledge, but going into this and talking about it, because like I said, there's times you don't get along with people, in real life. And then when you have the power of having a book out there, it's one of those things that we kind of had like the ground rules set up because, there's these are very big personalities and these are very exaggerated situations. And people that are reading this book hoping to get a burial or to get excessive dirt, you're not going to see it. You're going to see the influence of the NWO on WCW. You're going to see the butts and seats night and how Tony was told to kind of bury Mick Foley, even though that's something that Tony did not want to do. And I think that's even a very relatable situation because I think all of us in a job have been, or a lot of us in a professional setting have been put in a position where you have to do something maybe you don't want to do. Yeah. Whether it's as a supervisor, you have to fire somebody, or you have to tell somebody you can't get the refund, or whatever it may be. So those are things that anybody can relate to. But when you look at those quandaries, those situations on the backdrop of professional wrestling, it makes a fascinating story. A story that you might say will put butts in seats.
Wow. Dirk Manning, everyone.
You're welcome. I learned everything I learned about promotion from Tony Schiavone.
Wow.
Mindful of time, I've just got a couple of last questions here.
Sure.
You know how you said you didn't start at the beginning, you got 10 discrete chapters. Is it the kind of comic that you can kind of read in any order? Or would you say there is an actual climax to the book? And if there is, what would you say it is?
The actual climax the book would be my lot in life right now, where I am in my life, which at age 63 is the best position I've ever been in my life. Thanks to Tony Khan, Conrad Thompson, Cody, everybody involved in AEW, everybody behind the scenes. Conrad for lifting things off, Tony Khan for trusting in me and being not only my boss but my friend. That would be the climax of it. That that I went through this entire journey to where I loved it more than anything else. I was fortunate to get into it. I got into it. I worked in many major wrestling promotions. I got disenchanted with it. I wanted to recreate my career, and it came back to me full circle. So I think where I am now is the climax of the story.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I haven't talked about this in any other interview, so here's an exclusive for you.
Uh-oh.
Tony's story in wrestling is chapters 1 through 9. Chapter 10 is kind of like the blow off when we're talking about some of these crazy adventures he's had with the Four Horsemen, with Klondike Bill, with these different, wrestlers from over the years. That being said, I can see where a hardcore wrestling fan will want to pick up the book and jump to chapter 6 to see the Butts and Teats story, or jump to the chapter about the NWO, or jump to the chapter about the end of WCW. You could, but I think the arc of Tony's life and the impact of this will be much more appreciated reading it straight through. But if you really want to read the Klondike Bill stuff, look, jump right to chapter 10. All right, it's there. If you want to jump right to the end of WCW, jump to chapter 7. If you want to read just about Butts and Seats, jump right to chapter 6. And you could, and because every chapter is illustrated by a different artist, there's those natural breaks to do that. And I'm an anthology. I love anthology style storytelling as well. So part of that's baked in. But I would say to get the most holistic experience, start at the beginning, go all the way through, and then go back and revisit your favorite chapters again and again after you get the book at buttsandseatscomic.com before Friday at noon Eastern Standard or Eastern Daylight Savings Time.
Tony, what would you say is the most important call you've ever made?
The most important call that I've ever made? Important.
Or, the most memorable call you've ever made.
Well, the most memorable call is with everybody that I've been associated with in AEW. The most important call I made was Hulk Hogan, you can go straight to hell, because I'll go back to this. To me, the most memorable matches and the ones that I really get involved in, or the ones that I really enjoyed calling, was the ones that I ceased to become an announcer and become a fan. And here I am in Daytona Beach in 1996, the Bash of the Beach, and Hulk Hogan is turning heel in front of me. Now, we're not talking about just any wrestler, right?
Talking about Hulk
We're
Hogan.
We're talking about Hulk Hogan. We're talking about the guy that was on the cover of Sports Illustrated back when it wasn't fashionable to cover wrestling. We were talking about the guy who made WrestleMania what it was, and the guy who was the biggest star ever in the business. I worked there in 1989, 1990 through that time, and I know, man, I knew how big he was. So now I'm calling him, I'm there watching as the play-by-play announcer as he turns heel and does a masterful job, man. You have to go back and watch that to see how well he did.
I actually did. And every time I rewatch Bash at the Beach, one of the things that comes off of me is that you saved that commentary because Bobby Heenan almost ruined it.
Right. Well, you know what? We talked about that, but in the scheme of Bobby Heenan being Bobby Heenan and not trusting Hulk Hogan, that was his storyline. Never trust Hogan,
Yeah.
So in the scheme of Bobby Heenan's relationship with Hulk Hogan, you could say that he really didn't run it. So, but anyway, but at the end, when it all happened and they were counting me down, I'm thinking, what do I say? And it just hit me like that. It wasn't fed to me. It just came to me like that, as a wrestling fan would have said to Hulk Hogan. And we do this all the time backstage in AEW. People will look at me and says, Tony Schiavone, you can go straight to hell. And I know what they mean. Okay. And they're talking about that one moment. So that has to be really the most important. A lot of people would say it'd be the Butts and Seats comment because what it meant for the wrestling industry at that time. But no, to me, Hulk Hogan turning heel was a big deal. And I was glad I was a part of that.
Would you say heel Hulk Hogan was as big as face Hulk Hogan in the 80s?
Well, we were pretty big in the 90s.
Yeah.
But I can't see anything being as big as Hulk Hogan in the 80s.
Okay.
And it changed the landscape. It really did. I mean, they had cartoons made after him.
Rock and
Uh,
wrestling.
Rock and wrestling, absolutely. You know, marketing dolls, wrestling buddies. You know,
Say your prayers, eat your vitamins.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, and just one more super fanboy question that I just got to
Sure.
ask.
Sure.
You were there for the height of the Ultimate Warrior in WWE and Goldberg in WCW. Based
Yeah.
on your experience, the crowd reactions, backstage, everything, who was bigger?
Well, I'm going to have to go with Goldberg on this one. And I hate to say that because I was there at WrestleMania 6 at Skydome when Warrior beat Hogan, and it was a big deal. But nothing felt like Goldberg. And I remember when Goldberg beat Hogan for the title at the Georgia Dome, and I just remember the feeling that night. And of course, we were in his home state where he played college football, and everybody had known him. But no one rose on the scene like him. And because I was on the grassroots beginning of that, I would have to say it would be Goldberg.
And buttsandseatscomic.com, you guys had a goal of $20,000.
Yep.
You are now, as of this recording, at 119,348. You're this close to $100,000 margin. That is insane.
How about that? That is insane. Yeah.
I was talking to Travis McIntyre at SourcePoint Press today, and I told him, I said, you know, man, I said, Travis, I said, I have to say this out loud so that I believe it. I said, we are over $100,000 over our goal. And internally, hand to God, we thought at this point in the campaign, we'd be scratching at 70. Maybe if we really pushed, maybe we'd take up Lauren on our offer to push us over, insert her as the new love interest, you know, get a little angel bump like that. They call it an angel backer, Tony, you know, and maybe get us to $70,000, you know, right towards the end of the campaign. So to be where we are now, and I know between 70 and 120 doesn't sound like a lot, except for when you consider we're talking about a $25 to $45 investment, one person at a time. Oh, you know, we're closing in on 2,100 backers, and that's just in pre-sales. It's amazing. So to everyone that has backed and supported this book, sight unseen, thank you. And thank you for having us on to talk about it. It's really been an honor and a privilege to work on this book. We're excited about what's going to come of this. I'm excited for people to see the book. And thank you for having us on to talk about it, man.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you for coming on the show. This has been an honor.